Okay. Well, thank you all for coming to What's Next? Patterns and Practices in History in Print and Online. My name's Sean Martin, and I am the Executive Director of the American Association for History and Computing, and we're very happy to be co-sponsoring this session with AHA's Research Division. And we have kind of a setup where we'll have two brief presentations and then two commentaries, and then I'm hoping plenty of time for discussion and so forth afterwards. So I'll just introduce all of our speakers now, and they can go in turn, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So first off, I should announce that there's a slight change in what your program says. Ross Housewright and Roger Schoenfeld were going to be co-presenting on their topic. Unfortunately, Ross Housewright wasn't able to be here, but we're losing nothing in terms of content, so Roger will be able to handle everything, I'm sure, with no problem, right? Okay. So, first speaker today will be Roger Schoenfeld, who leads research efforts at Ithaca. His work is focused on shifts in faculty attitudes and research practices in an electronic environment. And also he wrote JSTOR, a history, focusing on the development of sustainable nonprofit business models. Next, talking will be Robert Townsend, who is the Assistant Director for Research and Publications at the AHA, where he tracks information on the history of the profession. He received his PhD from George Mason University and is now revising his dissertation for the University of Chicago Press. Our two commentators today will be William Thomas, who is the department chair at the Department of History at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He was the founding director of the Virginia Center for Digital History, has his PhD from history in the University of Virginia, and is currently working on a book called The Iron Way, Civil War and the Making of Modern America for Yale University Press. And last, but certainly not least, is Francis Bluin, who is director of the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan. He is a professor in the School of Information and in History at the University of Michigan, has a PhD from the University of Minnesota, and has worked on the Vatican Archives, an inventory and guide to historical documentation. And also, I should say, that get your books now. At this AHA meeting, Oxford University Press is releasing a book by Bluin and Bill Rosenberg called Processing the Past, Contesting Authority in History and in the Archives. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our esteemed panelists, and we have Roger first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to be at my first AHA meeting, and really the first time that I've had the opportunity to share some of these. I'm trying to get it on both screens at the same time. The first time I've had the opportunity to share some of the findings from our faculty survey with a scholarly association in this kind of format. So it's a bit of from my perspective, a bit of an experiment as to whether you'll find the work valuable. But I think there's some very interesting patterns that I hope can yield some really fruitful discussion here. And can I just say thank you to Sean for the introduction, and to Rob for thinking that this might be a useful topic to bring to AHA. I thought it would be useful to just say a quick word or two about the not-for-profit organization that I'm affiliated with, just to give a sense of who we are for those of you who may not be familiar. Ithaca is an organization, a not-for-profit organization that helps the academic community use digital technologies to both for preservation purposes and to advance research and teaching. And we run three services, so at least one of which I'm sure most people in the room are familiar with, but there are actually three of them. One is Ithaca SNR, our strategy and research group, but we also run Portico, the research and teaching platform, and Portico, the digital preservation service. Ithaca SNR, my sort of organizational home is a research and consulting service for the higher education community. And we do research in 5 different areas: the sustainability of new digital resources, new academic digital resources, how the role of the library is changing in an increasingly digital environment, how teaching and learning is developing with new technology, the way that scholarly publishing and academic publishing are changing today. And then finally, the topic area that this talk draws from, which is practices and attitudes of researchers, teachers, and students, where our faculty survey from 2009 was the most recent faculty survey we've done, but we've actually been surveying faculty members about their attitudes and habits related to use of the library, use of new formats, scholarly communications, publishing, and other kinds of related issues since 2000. So we've done these surveys fairly regularly, and one of the exciting things is that we can look at trends and how trends have shaped over the course of the past decade. The most recent survey was conducted in the fall of 2009. So it's getting a little dated, actually. We mailed 35,000 and some surveys to academics at U.S. colleges and universities, and received about an 8.6 response rate, which was very representative of the sample. But you know, we try to be realistic about the fact that while findings have consistency over time, it's more of a hypothesis building mechanism than something that you can use to draw solid conclusions from. So our sample contains faculty at U.S. higher education institutions, no students, graduate or undergraduate students, no international institutions, no community colleges, and it's almost all the fields in many universities, arts and sciences, education, law, engineering, business, but no health sciences, which is an important lacuna here. And the stratification for historians that I'll be sharing, which I'll be comparing to the overall responses, draws on just shy of 200 responses. So I have four areas that I'm going to try to speak about today. One is how the role of discovery is changing, the way that faculty members discover academic resources is changing, and what that means for the role of the library. As the second area is the format transition for scholarly works, the print to electronic format transition. And then more briefly, I'll be covering scholars' publishing preferences in academic journals, what they look for in the journals that they publish in, and then finally the way the role of the scholarly society is perceived by faculty members today. So discovery seems like more important of an issue to some people than to others. When we've looked at discovery now over the past decade, we've used this question, which is getting a little dated in certain ways, but actually provides, I think, a really robust comparative analysis over the course of time. And so this is exactly how it's worded. When you are conducting academic research, which of these four starting points do you use to begin locating information for your research? And we have these four general areas, which are certainly broader and fairly non-specific in certain ways, but look at the responses and you'll see how patterns have changed over the course of time. So you have these two, what you might call local discovery sites, the library building and your online library catalog. And you can see from 2003 to 2006 to 2009, the share of faculty members, the share of respondents that say that those that's their starting point has been in steady decline. And then by comparison, the more what you might call network level or online tools, the general purpose search engine and the specific electronic research resource have been taking up what's been declining on the local level. And so in general, you can see a shift in discovery from the library to the online resources, which of course libraries have helped to encourage and lead that transition for scholars, but that's the way that discovery has been shifting broadly. Now, some people have looked at these numbers and said, well, that must surely mean that this is just scientists that are changing, because it's folks who care about journals. It's where the journal literature has folks who care almost exclusively about journals. It's because the journal literature has moved online. And so one of the things that our survey has allowed us to do is do these disciplinary stratifications. So the green bars, I'm not sure if this is going to be clear to everyone, the green bars are the overall numbers that you were just looking at from 2009. The red bars are humanists, and then the blue bars are historians, so each is a subset of the other. And you can see that historians are certainly more likely to start, for example, in the online library catalog than humanists in general are, or than the overall respondents are, and correspondingly less likely to begin in a general purpose search engine or a specific electronic research resource. But when you look at humanists generally over the course of time, and this holds true for historians as well, though I don't think I have the slide, you can see that that the same patterns obtain, they're at a different place, but the same patterns obtain from 2003 to 2006 to 2009. Even humanists who are more dependent on monographs, use monographs relatively more. Nevertheless, their use of the library building or the online library catalog as a starting point for research, as a discovery site, are declining steadily, and correspondingly, these network services are increasing. So even though humanists and historians are at a different absolute place than scientists and social scientists are today, the pattern, the directional movement, is that they are all moving in the same direction, which is to say away from local starting points and towards online starting points. So that's, I think, a really important takeaway, and you'll see in a few minutes that there's been relatively little action on the ebook front in our survey, and nevertheless, there still are these sort of structural shifts, what I would describe as structural shifts, away from the library and towards online as a starting point. So you say, okay, well that's great. Maybe that reflects everyone's practices in the room, and you can sort of see yourself reflected in there, or perhaps not. But that may not mean very much. But so then we start to look at what does that mean for the changing role of the library, and this is a question that we've been tracking on again for a number of years. How important is it to you that your college or university library provides each of the functions listed below? And in quotes is exactly what was in the what was presented to the faculty members in the survey. But for simplicity's sake, I call them Gateway, Archive, and Buyer. Gateway is basically helping with discovery, locating information. Archive is cataloging and preserving and taking care of things over time. And then the Buyer is the function that everyone values from the library, which is paying for things, whether it's buying or licensing things. And so over the course of time, looking at all faculty members, you can see how the perceived importance of the gateway role has been in, not dramatic decline, but in somewhat steady, gradual decline. The archive role hasn't really seen a meaningful pattern. And then the buyer role has just gotten more and more important over the course of time. So if you if in your mind, you just isolate those blue bars for a moment where things were in 2003, you can see that the buyer role was a little more important than the archive role, was a little more important than the gateway role. But today, if you look at the green bars, it's pretty dramatic. It's 90% of respondents saying that the buyer role is very important to them, and it's less than 60% of respondents saying that this gateway or discovery role that the library provides is very important to them. So you can see how the sort of practices are translating into different ways of valuing things that the library actually does, which may or may not matter to an audience of historians, but I can assure you matters very much to an audience of librarians. And so what we did for the first time in this most recent iteration of the survey, we added 2 additional roles. In addition to Gateway, Archive, and Buyer, we added teaching support and research support, because librarians, if you ask them what they think their most important roles are, is really supporting the teaching and learning process, whether it's information literacy or becoming engaged with assisting student learning and teaching, and of course, especially at research universities, in assisting faculty research and making them more productive and effective. So we wanted to see, well, given that librarians tell us that those are the more important roles, how do those compare with these sort of more traditional or historic roles of Gateway, Archive, and Buyer? And so here is the sort of the aggregate of all faculty members, and you can see that where Buyer, you already saw Gateway, Archive, and Buyer at 90% of faculty members saying that's a very important role of the library. You can see that teaching support and research support are tied really for third place with the gateway, which, as we saw, has been in steady decline. So we don't have the trend line data. We don't know if teaching support roles are seen as, research support roles are seen as increasing or as decreasing. But certainly they're not nearly as valued today by faculty members as they are by librarians, and that's a really interesting disconnect, I think, that comes out of our research.